Okay, welcome everyone. It is the top of the hour, noon. We want to welcome all of our viewers to today's webcast, Building a More Sustainable Brand. I am Alyssa Rade. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain.Life, and I am joined today by some incredible panelists who will introduce themselves in just a moment time. I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things. We're going to get started pretty promptly. We have really rich, interesting discussion today. So for those on the line, please use the Q&A function, not the chat, for any questions that you have throughout the webinar. We will hold sufficient time at the end to get to your questions, and we look forward to viewing them. So with that, let's kick it off. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Climate Week to anyone who is engaging and celebrating. I am Alyssa Rade, Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain.Life, and we're here to talk to you today about building a more sustainable brand. And we have some incredible panelists who are joining the conversation. Alix Armour, co-founder and head of sustainability from Super 73. Megan Kasich, Vice President and Head of Product Design from Turtle Fur, and John Van Keppel, CSR and ESG Lead from Mother Kombucha. So these are some great brands. They're going to introduce themselves. And with that, let's dive into today's discussion. Great. So let's just kick it off with some introductions. Alix, do you want to kick it off and tell everybody a little about, let's go with name, company, what you do, just to ground everybody in some of the perspectives and brands that we have on the line.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Alyssa and Sustain.Life for inviting me. I'm head of sustainability and co-founder at Super 73. So Super 73 is an American lifestyle adventure brand, and we make a range of electric bikes. We started about 6 years ago in 2016, and now we sell globally with offices in Irvine and Amsterdam. And I have actually personally been focusing on sustainability for the past 2 years. And just kind of learning as we go, but it's really, really interesting because, you know, an electric bike is already a top climate solution, but, you know, you realize there's a lot more we can do in sustainability beyond electric and beyond supply chain, beyond manufacturing. So I've been really digging into all of this and learning a ton, and it's super exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Megan, you want to go ahead?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Megan Kasich, she, her. We sell products for winter activities, outdoor headwear and accessories, outdoor places, fun, skiing, everything. I think a lot of people could say they have a turtle fur neck warmer that they've had since they were a wee child in their closet. So we have been trickling through this journey. We are a 40-year-old company. So we started in 1982. So we've been around for some time. And recently we have discovered that, you know, we do want to tell people what we believe in and have a stronger stance in saving the planet and saving each other.
Awesome. All right, John, you want to round it out?
Sure. John Van Keppel. I'm with a company called Mother Kombucha. So we make kombucha. We're in St. Petersburg, Florida. We also make this other unique drink called Aguabucha, which is a kombucha-powered sparkling water that's infused with the goodness of kombucha. This is our latest project. We've been since the inception, really, Mother Kombucha has been a focus on sustainability because we use organic products, so we want to care for the earth, and we create a lot of compostable materials, so they get composted. But moving into a more sort of looking at the more responsibilities or the other things that we could do, we've started looking to other options, and we've just recently, within the last 2 weeks, became a B Corporation. So we got our certification after 4 years of slaving away at that. Part of the delay problem was the whole pandemic, but and I'm just trying to help steer and guide what we do as far as what's involved in the whole umbrella of sustainability, corporate social responsibility, ESG.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. We're so excited to have you and to host you and to share your insight and your perspective with this audience. You know, I think what I want to kind of ground today's conversation in is that there's today's dialogue is really about providing insight to the practical steps that a business and a brand can take to launch and build and grow their sustainability program. I think we see, sustainability reports and ESG reports and all these claims, and it can seem so daunting and intimidating to kind of get there. And so what we really want to share today is just the real world insight and experience of like, this is how you do it. You just start somewhere, right? And it grows and it evolves, and like how to really practically and tactically approach this in a way that is just a bit more accessible rather than this like big, daunting, intimidating bar that seems like somewhat insurmountable. We see like so many global leading brands and big mega companies, but there are things and ways that smaller brands can engage and have such powerful and real programs so tightly tied to their operations. And because they are a smaller company than like a huge, mega multinational corporate, really just so ingrained and entrenched with how their business operates. And so with that, let's give the audience just a little bit of a sense of what are some of the most pressing sustainability issues that your brand faces, or where is really the beginning of where your efforts have evolved and what your core activity is. Who wants to kick it off? Who will be our first brave participant? Just to share a little bit of context of what's most important to your brand and where you're really concentrating a lot of your efforts and what sustainability means to you.
I think that's a really good question. I think that's something every company has to answer and I think that's where we're at. We wanted to find out who are we and what do we have to contribute to the whole sustainability issue, because we don't want to try to do everything that's out there, but what makes sense to us. We can't tackle the plastic problem, and we're small enough that we're not going to change, one of our suppliers' ways of doing things, but we can identify who we are and find out what we do and then communicate that. So I would say that, we're in the process of finding out, who we are and where our issues are. So this year, I'm really spending my time getting a baseline for where are we in regards to sustainability. And this is, I'm going to throw a plug in for Sustain.Life, and we weren't asked to do this, but this was something that was a game changer for me, because I kept looking like, how do I figure out what our greenhouse gas emission is? I know there's organizations out there that'll do it for you, but I wanted to understand it more so that we were in control of it. And then we could decide, do we want to do an offset that's here in the Tampa Bay area instead of, just giving money to another certification organization? So that being said, and it takes work to sort of figure out, how do I collect my information and then put it into Sustain.Life app, and then what do I do with that? So we're in the process of still discovering who we are. And I think that's what I would say to everybody that's interested in tackling this, is start from where you're at and don't worry about that. But and it's an iterative process. You do two things forward and you take a step back. You think, oh, that's not the right way. So I would just say, calm down and just accept for who you are, and then move forward at your pace.
I can go next. And I totally agree with John. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, when we started introducing sustainability, the idea of sustainability, I think it was really important for us to kind of get a common understanding of what it meant. So we organized just a little kind of a group circle and just discussed what it meant to each of us and our brand, to all the employees and the brand, which was really fun because, sustainability, the term can be quite vague. So it was good to understand everyone's perspective. And then the next step was, we didn't really want to overwhelm the teams that are already, have huge loads of work. So it was important for me, as I was trying to start these projects and look at which frameworks would be best, is like, what is the current situation and what elements of in the environment and social and governance aspect we can actually work on quickly and efficiently. So, what are the low-hanging fruits? Where do we want to go with it? And how can we kind of integrate these without overwhelming everyone into the existing systems? And as John said, you do have to understand that these things evolve. Some of the tools that are out there also get updated, like the greenhouse gas protocols and those documents. And, even the span over 2 years, there's new technologies that shows up. Like at the beginning of my research, I didn't know about Sustain.Life and all these other tools out there. So you have to be flexible, you have to adapt. And then you also have to know that environmental regulations also get thrown at you. So it means you have to update packaging and understand the guidelines and rules and regulations from a global perspective. And that gets also it seeps into your sustainability plan.
Yep. And I just want to spend like 2 seconds calling out with a term that I think you've just described in your program and your approach. And you were saying, like, we got together as a small group, we asked our employees what was important. Like, that is stakeholder engagement. There are these terms that we hear in sustainability and ESG that sound like very technical and like, oh, what is that process? And it's like, yeah, it means talking to the people involved in your business, whether that's a customer, an employee, an investor, a board member, right? And like understanding what are the most important issues to you specific to this business. So I just want to do like a quick plug, because I think so often, especially with, some of the customers that we work with, but often in engaging in these conversations, there's like this jargon and technical terminology in sustainability. And for those that are just starting out, like, let's throw it out the window. Let's really just be real about what a lot of these things are, because that's what this is about. It's about like the practical, real steps of how you start taking action here and doing it. And then before you know it, look, you've got a sustainability program, you've done it. This is what it is. All right, I'm zipping it. Megan, please share a little bit about Turtle for Her.
Sure. As I mentioned before, we are a legacy company. 40 years we've been hanging around here, doing our thing and enjoying outdoor life and adventures, but that does bring a lot of different baggage. So for us, it was a little deeper entrenched, where we had to shift from a company strictly for profit to a business that's designed around people, planet, and profit. And that doesn't just happen overnight because you say, that's what I want to do. That's the shift I want to make. And the way that we took the approach was, it's always better if you can reduce consumption on things, right? Like, where you can find reductions is where you're going to make the biggest gains, but you also make a lot of financial gains when you do that. So we took it as okay, let's see where we can find gains, where we can reduce as much usage of things, like reusing our cardboard. So we saved, I think it was 3,500 pounds of cardboard in 1 year, just in buying virgin cardboard. But that didn't account for, in addition to that, how many pounds we saved by reusing it and not having to ship it around. So that the cost gain there. So it was like $30,000 that we saved, right? So it's like, when you can start finding those efficiencies within your own organization into your normal practices, then you can make a case for the existence of shifting this mentality, which then just, for us, it was like a natural progression of, okay, here are the savings, here are the things we're doing. Let's start to turn over fabrics to do things in more sustainable fibers. And suddenly everyone was really excited and everyone wanted to invest their time and their money to make these changes. So then we started to pick at, we're currently trying to become a B Corp. We submitted our application. We're in the middle of the verification process. So once you start filling out the report, the B Impact Assessment on B Lab, it's like you're exposed to all of these things, all these ideas, all these places that, wow, like, this is not just like, in your mind when you start, you're thinking sustainability, all you think about is environmental, and you don't think about the social and the governance and the employees, and like how much all of this work deeply impacts even the individual working in the warehouse. It's like how it all trickles in, and it's all important on a different level, instead of just being like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I buy offsets for my building and be done with it. It's like, okay, I'm going to actually make changes that impact people's lives and work towards climate prevention and, get involved in activism and all these things. There's so many opportunities that you don't know are available to help you make an impact until you start really digging into all the layers of what it means to be sustainable as a company.
Completely. And I always, there's always not even naysayers, but when it comes up in conversation of, what's the business case for sustainability? How can you really show the cost savings? And I just always go back to like the very definition of what sustainability is, which like I always go back to the original like UN report of it's the ability to provide for yourself without compromising the ability of future generations to provide for themselves or to meet their own needs. And so when you think about that as a business, your needs could be your resource needs, your consumption needs, your financial needs. Like the business case for sustainability to me is so integrated into the definition of what sustainability means, like operating in such a way where you will be able to operate in the future. That is sustainable business. Mm-hmm. So like the less money you spend on a resource because you're using less of it, or you found an efficient reuse of an existing resource, that's, a cost savings that is just integrated into your business. And even I'll say like for those, like, sure, sometimes there are those upfront capital investments, right? Those CapEx costs. And so having the systems in place where you can track operational savings, where you can say like, all right, like, yeah, we're going to do an upfront cost, but over time, this thing is going to pay itself back in 3 years. And like, we know we're going to be around for 50. So like, that's an easy sell for those type things. Yeah. You've touched on so many things there as well with the social aspect of sustainability.
Yeah, you can, we could talk all day about that. There's so many things that happen. And part of ours, the other part that was made it easy for us to make that transition was we have a program called Project Warmth. So it's a tag, share, give. So it's interactive with our consumers. And you can also go on our website and like nominate a charity that you want us to donate to. And then we have partners that we work with too that are part of that program to make sure that we're providing either money or product to the right places for people that need them, whether it's a school or it's, an organization or whatever it is. And the emotional return on that, it really helps to encourage people to want to continue that relationship. So now we're committed to a minimum of 2% of our profits go towards these endeavors. And it's actually more than that when we do the actual calculation, but that's our like bare minimum. And we weren't calculating that. We were just doing it. Right. So it's like so many things, you're probably already doing a lot of them. And that's part of the great part of, again, I'll boost the B impact assessment. It's like you start to see all the places that you are doing really amazing things, and you just haven't stopped to think about them, to review them, and to take credit for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a hugely valuable point with those kinds of certifications or frameworks or other rating systems. Like they are twofold. They are there to recognize things you're already doing and guide you to say like, okay, have you thought about these other things?
Yeah, for me, the B impact assessment has been a really, really great tool to kind of, use as a framework. But as Megan was saying, is like there's a lot of things that are actually quite difficult to quantify. And, there's many things that we do already. And then when you go through all the questions in the B impact assessment, you realize like, wow, okay, this is actually worth a lot. How can we do more? At Super 73, we do a lot of group rides and, things with our community. Our community is super important to us. And this is a, huge social experience that a lot of people, they've made many impactful friendships and, start working together. So it's incredibly valuable to our brand, but, how can we, integrate this in our, assessment or understand how we can do better and contribute more? How is this related to sustainability? So I do encourage to look at different frameworks, the impact assessment, and there's other ones, but at the end of the day, they all kind of look similar. So it's also a great way to kind of, maybe share some of those questions with other team members so that they can understand in their department how they can make an impact. One of the things that we did early on is do workshops in all the different departments, like small groups of 6 or 8. So that, and kind of like going over the SDG goals and, explaining what the B Corp was, the B impact assessment, and then kind of curated to their work, whether it was in marketing or logistics or in the warehouse, how can they make an impact in their everyday work, and then, trying to get them to come up with ideas and incorporating that in our strategy.
Yeah, it really, it's just such a clear example of how like integrating, how these frameworks and certifications are helpful at providing like the skeletal framework of how to really integrate this into your core business function. Like I think the days of sustainability being this siloed discipline they're gone. That's frankly how I started my career. It was like a specialized niche function. And I think where business and industry has evolved, given Paris Agreement, given just where we are as a society, is like I think that sustainability is like becoming such a core business function into the very fabric of how a business operates, especially a consumer brand that is making a good and making a thing and creating a resource. It's particularly, like top of mind to think about, well, how are you, you're generating a thing and you're using things. How are you doing that in a thoughtful and responsible way? Yeah. Okay. So we're diving so far ahead. Let's back it up for a second for everyone. I'd love for you guys to share just a little bit of your background and your origin. I think something that is it's unique with this group, but perhaps not so unique in the grand scheme of things, is that I don't think not one of you started out as sustainability experts. It's kind of something that you've grown into and has evolved at your company and, became part of your role. And now might be your main job function, but probably didn't start that way. So can you provide a little background just at each of your brands, like where did your sustainability efforts start? What was the first project? What was the first initiative? Who championed it? Like what actually happened so that everyone on the line can understand like where it can start and what it can grow to? Don't all jump in at once.
Well, actually, for me, that's a little bit difficult to answer, only because I think in some ways I've been involved with sustainability, for most of my career at different levels, because I've been involved in nonprofit management, specifically in community development sectors. So education, housing, women's health. And a lot of that was driven by the precursors to the SDGs. So they were the millennial goals.
Yes.
So, I've been, which I never really liked, because they were focused on, the third world, whereas the SDGs are focused on everybody. We're all responsible, right? So I've sort of been involved with this for many, many, many years, but as it's developed and grown. So I also, being on the nonprofit side, we also worked with a lot of corporations that were looking to get involved with other nonprofit organizations as part of their social responsibility. I got lucky here in St. Pete. My friends of mine own this company. They had a situation arise where they had more product that they couldn't, that they needed to start just giving away, or otherwise it was going to expire. So I developed a program to give this away to people who were first responders during the pandemic. And from there, it just moved me into doing, more, setting up policies and procedures. And it's just is evolving.
That's incredible. That's an example of like, you almost didn't approach it from how can we be sustainable. It's like there was a problem, there was a scenario. We've got extra product, we don't want to waste it. What do we do with it? And then finding a solution and then being like, oh, well, like this seems like a very smart way to, avoid waste and make proper use of our resources. So like, I want to ask what stakeholders were involved at the company to really push that? Was, that sounds like it was probably like operations management, how did that?
Right. No, it was actually already, they were already in the process of the B Corporation. The problem is everything got sort of, it's a small, a little bit bigger than a startup organization. So everybody's doing, wearing many hats. And
Sure.
it just, that sort of thing kept getting pushed to the side, because a lot of it had to do with like developing policies and procedures and who wants to do that when you can, do something that's more active. So it's sort of all that stuff kept getting pushed over to the side, and I've done all that in the past. So I said, I can do that. I can help you with all that. So yeah, it was just a fortunate thing where two people had needs, came together, and it's working out great.
Awesome.
So to go back to you, but the company has always been, sustainability minded, but they, but like most people, they don't know what that means, So through things like the B Corporation or through other organizations that were involved with discovering more what that means and what does it look like. So yeah, it was a evolving organic sort of process.
Interesting. Cool. All right, Alix, Megan, can you share a little bit about what's the origin story? Like, what was the first project? Who championed it? Who pushed it? What were some of the challenges? What allowed it to succeed?
Sure, I could start. Well, I mean, my background is in industrial design. That's what I studied in college, along with Mandarin studies. So nothing really to do with sustainability, but maybe an understanding of product and everything. And yeah, I mean, starting as a co-founder, you tend to do all sorts of stuff. So I worked like in all the different departments, which I think is great because in sustainability, you have to have an understanding of how everything works, all the departments, and it makes it a lot easier to see where you can have an impact and how these things work, how they're being built. But really, it started in 2018, 2019. Of course, we were making electric vehicles. That already is considered one of the top 100 solutions. But the conversations around sustainability, especially when I was living in Paris at the time, developing European business, the conversation around sustainability was really accelerating a lot that year. It was just all around me and on the radio and media, and a lot more than in the US. So that, along with a lot of other things going on in my life and other influences, it was kind of getting into my brain. Sustainability, what does it actually mean? ESG, carbon footprint. Back a couple of years ago, we weren't talking about it as much as today. And we had launched a really, really cool collaboration with a very large partner, the Paris Saint-Germain football club. And it was really, really awesome for both brands, really successful. And I was thinking, this is really good added value, and it's fun to do these. It's great for both brands. And but it also made me realize the power of brand collaboration. And I was trying to think, like, how can we, keep on doing these collaborations, but also maybe at the service of sustainability? How can we use collaborations to further both brands in our efforts? And this is actually one of the SDGs, 17 partnerships. So I was really thinking, like, as a startup, like many of you listening, it's difficult when your teams are still growing to develop every single aspect of your product or even the supply chain. It's hard to really make it the most sustainable. So maybe we can use the help of other brands who are experts in that to work together and make each of our products more sustainable. So that's kind of how it all kind of started working in my brain. And then I made a proposal to my other co-founders of, like, maybe beyond just being an electric bike, there's more we could do for our community. And it kind of comes down to, community, as I said, is very important to us. And a lot of our media and content takes place outdoors. We promote adventure and exploring everywhere. So there's a lot of images of our riders and, real shots of our community going out there exploring forests and by beachside promenades, and even in urban centers where the quality of air is important and everything. So I'm thinking if as a brand, we want to continue to have our riders explore safely in clean air and enjoy those beautiful beaches, then, we should also have a part in maintaining that.
I can go obviously next. I actually have a very similar story to Alix as far as like coming from a product background. That is primarily still my responsibility. But being a small company, there's not a lot of people. So I do a lot more than just design product, right? It's like, okay, you're also responsible for supplying like finding suppliers and figuring out where things are coming from and what's going in those, and then the regulations related to those, Prop 65, and all kinds of other regulation related things that start to make you think, like, why would I use this if it doesn't, if it's not supported by other places, then it clearly isn't good. And how can you shift that? And again, like, how can you share resources? So we're members of lots of industry groups that help us share resources, which is such a valuable tool to support you, like, emotionally and physically, because everyone talks about the struggles they're going through, and one person's struggle is probably 20 other people's struggle at least. But things like consolidating shipping, something that didn't really occur a lot in previous times. It's like, oh, well, that's obvious. It's an obvious gain for everyone, including the environment, setting up standard and rules about your packaging. Like, we will only use these materials for packaging, period. Even like any printed materials, like, we have standards that we set along the way, and they were all like very cumulative. Like, there was a lot of passionate individuals without a sustainability leader. So like, everyone just kind of inserted layer upon layer of the little things that they could do until it became this big heaping mass of good things. And still, there's no one person that's head of sustainability, but we do now have an ESG team. So we have a team of individuals that all work on parts and pieces and work with the company related to their responsibilities. And then, I'm just basically championing all these things. It's like, okay, let's go get that thing now. Let's go get this thing now. Like, I'm more the passion driver than the like holding you to the one thing, because we're all holding each other accountable. So it's an interesting journey, but I'm sure it's the same for many people.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear the differences in origin, right? Like, driven by regulation, driven by a business need, like consolidated shipping. It's an obvious efficiency. You don't even have to be a champion of environmental, causes to think like, oh, okay, that sounds like something that we could do in a more cost-effective way. Okay, so we now know where you all started and the various places and perspectives that these kinds of efforts and initiatives can kind of take launch from. What do your programs look like today? How is this structured? I mean, Megan, you just spent some time talking about how this is structured across Turtle Fur's organization with an ESG team. Is that similar across your brands? Do you still have, kind of like a collective stakeholder group of team members across disciplines? Do you have dedicated roles? Do you have teams? What does that look like? And then what are some of the most pressing issues and initiatives that you're all currently working on across your various brands? Don't
John?
make me call on people.
Okay. I can, for Super 73, we're still, right now, sustainability sits and works a lot with compliance and quality. So we're in the operations, which is really important. When you manufacture electric bikes, there's a lot of supply chain related improvements we can make, and, in manufacturing. So what has been really helpful is working with industry work groups. Like, for example, we are part of the People for Bike sustainability work groups. And in there's this a subcommittee for social and environmental responsibility in the supply chain, which I've been very involved with. And it's been, that's where I've learned a lot about how we can make these little improvements. So this is why sustainability and compliance is important to us, especially on a global scale. And being in Europe, there are a lot of new regulations coming in regards to packaging. In addition to reporting lithium-ion batteries, we also have to report on e-waste and packaging. And some countries, more than others, start laying out rules on what the graphics actually need to say, instructions on recycling. So that has obviously influenced our graphics. And so it really depends, especially from Europe and the United States, those differences. So a lot of what I do is try to understand what's coming up in Europe and being proactive about it. And also, I believe a lot of countries are looking at Europe as an example. So having a foot in both countries and continents is helpful to kind of understand where the world is going in terms of rules and regulations and prepare us. And this helps us really prepare us in production and the materials we use. So I try to make sure our design teams are aware and basically start getting used to specifying materials, because one of the biggest things I've learned in sustainability is gathering data, gathering data on everything, materials, weights, because at the end of the day, you have to report it. And this is how you can reduce everything. So yeah, right now that's kind of where it brings the most value in rules and regulations, making sure that we're on top of that, and setting up all the processes to gather data so we can work, more efficiently. That's a little glimpse.
I have actually a tactical question that maybe is hopefully valuable for some folks on the line. So operating across international jurisdictions, especially in Europe, where the environmental regulations do lead those of America, and there are things you have to do in Europe, like you said, with materials and waste and reporting and like actually what you can use that you don't have to do here. As a business, how do you navigate maybe like the cost implication of that? Like, did you decide like, okay, even though X is more expensive either to buy or to do it this way, like this will allow for consistency across like, our line in all regions? Or did you say like, you know what, we're going to do it this way for the European market and kind of diversify and still do it this way for the US market? Should there be folks on the line that also, you can be a small brand and be an international player, you are certainly evidence of that. So can you share some insight about like what your just, process was in making those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, well, I mean, it can get really, really complicated. So we try to keep things simple. And now that we know these things, we try to make sure that when we enter a new market, we're aware of some of these regulations. We know what we're getting into, because it's not going to be as simple anymore. You can't just enter a market. You have to know, okay, do you have to register as part of a recycling scheme? Like there's a lot more things to know before you actually launch a product. So between Europe and the US, it's still, we're still quite small. So we're trying to just simplify and streamline our whole production. But when it comes to, in different markets, we try to keep things simple and make sure that our reporting is, as clear as possible. And as I said earlier, making sure that we gather the data and the materials. And so it's the least amount of different types of parts and bikes that are, have different, the better. So we're still in that phase of trying to simplify and making sure we have the right data, but it gets more and more complicated. So for all the teams to be aligned, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, it's like data, the blessing and a curse, right? Like can't live without it.
Well, so, that's why I'm also trying to get some of this information at the source. So with our suppliers, because it's a lot of work for our teams to try to like go in and look at all the parts and suppliers and get the information ourselves. So I'm trying to get it at the source of the supply chain. Okay. And that it's just, it just flows automatically. So I'm trying to focus on automation and alleviating the work on our teams.
Yep. And what, for all of you guys, like, what is that experience like being, and perhaps this is an unfair assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but, being a smaller brand and the kind of, buying power and, ability you have to make certain demands of your suppliers, like things like, access to certain data. Is that a challenge, or do you think, like that's just part of operating? Like what, how does that work, and how can similar brands on the line kind of navigate, and what can they do if they do run into roadblocks, from things outside of their own operation and in their supply chain?
It's really complicated, especially when you have a lot of small suppliers. It's you can only ask so much, right? But at the same time, you have a standard. Like there is a standard in which you are willing to live with and you're not willing to live with, and you need to communicate with them what that is. it started for us with doing a supplier survey, asking a bunch of questions to try and get more transparency to understand what's going on the ground level, making sure you visit, like go in and don't just go to the office, but actually go to the location where whatever you're making is being made, to really know what's happening. That's also critical because you can step in there and know right away if something is wrong. I mean, it's generally pretty obvious. And you can decide based on that who you do and don't want to be involved with. The other thing is a lot of these manufacturers, they're probably already doing a lot of those things for someone else bigger than you.
Yep.
So that is the plus side of a lot of these situations, is especially if you're working with someone who's also working with someone from the European market, they're having a whole lot of regulations that they have to adhere to. So you can lean into that and use those certifications because they're certifying the factory, right? They're certifying that company. It doesn't have to be your specific line of product. And then things are getting more complicated, as they should, as we're looking for deeper accountability, and the government's forcing that, which is great, especially in our business of anything with textiles, of forced labor, and really knowing so many more tiers out than what was actually just 6 months ago considered the standard acceptance, right? So it's like suddenly there's this reach that you thought that you were not expected to be thinking about, not that you shouldn't be thinking about, but it wasn't required. It wasn't part of even the general standard for the high achievers. So there's a whole lot more pressure. And I think that there's going to be a lot more regulations that will force sustainability to become more like accounting. You're going to have a sustainable accounting department. That's going to be a requirement, or you're not going to be able to do business. So you're better off if you start doing it all now.
Yep. I mean, I can't not chime in with just a footnote on like being started in compliance, and like brands and manufacturers and goods. You're used to compliance, right? Like you make a thing, you just sell it and distribute it to the masses. Like there is control and compliance involved in that. But compliance is coming to all companies. When we think of this proposed rule by the SEC about reporting greenhouse gas emissions, the laws that are already happening in Europe, in the EU, and in the UK, I think exactly what you said, like sustainable accounting, whether you want to call it ESG or sustainable accounting or ESG accounting, like businesses are going to be responsible for having, knowing, understanding, and sharing this data. Like this is no longer going to be, oh, we're not involved in the environment. Oh, that's, not part of our brand identity. It's like regulation exists for the purpose of, protecting the common good. And clearly we know the impact that any business has in terms of how they operate and the resources they use and how they release those back into the environment and the emissions that they cause and all of that. And that the idea of regulation, I think, is one that brands, not just brands, all companies, need to get used to, because it is here and it's continuing, to come and evolve. And, ultimately in the US, what this proposed rule about, emissions or climate disclosure and risks and opportunities and, the actual greenhouse gases, what that actually looks like in its final stages has yet to be determined. Very active talks going on about that this week at Climate Week. But like, it's clearly here. It's clearly going to happen in some way. And so building, I think, the basic understanding of being able to speak that language and having just like the broad terminology, like at your business, whether that's a person or a team or, we talk about all the different ways you can get support, whether it's a consultant or a software product, whatever it is that you're looking for, realizing that this is going to be an expectation for every business to be able to engage in and communicate on.
Yeah, I want to comment on that because this is like a passionate thing for me of, I actually am really excited about regulations, and, not often do you hear those words out of everyone's mouth, but it creates a unified expectation and removes the political conversation. If everyone is expected to do the same thing, right, it's a whole lot easier to do something if you know what you're expected to do than it is to just like part and parcel things together and make up what you think sustainability looks like. Is it social? Is it environmental? Is it a combination? Is it this? Is it that? Like, if we all have that same expectation, it's a whole lot easier for us to join that track towards the reductions that are required for us to survive. Like, that's just common sense. So I'm big time an activist for regulations.
Tune in next week for Megan's podcast, Regulation, a clarifying moment.
Write your senators.
I agree with that too. I think, but it's also, it works in threes. Like, if it's not regulatory, then there's, a social and community pressure. And also sometimes it's up to brands that are leading the way and influencing other brands. So you always have to juggle these three things. Maybe there's more, but, and they help each other, when one's not pushing, the others are. So you have to find that balance, but look at all of them.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that it's more than regulation. It's a lot of it is market driven. What are our clients telling us, that they need? So too much regulation might adversely affect one industry. So I think that having some regulation, but also letting the market sort of really dictate, what it is that we do, let them inform us. But to answer your other question, I was just going to say that some of the things that where we are and how we're developing this is one is that I think data collection is so important. I didn't realize how important that was going to be for us to find out who we are and then who we want to be. But with that data collection, you also have to create systems to help interpret that data, right? So that's been what I've been doing a lot of, is discovering that. But I also think it's important for the companies to decide to think about who do they want to be. I mean, there's a lot of models out there. I mean, we will never be Starbucks, but maybe Ben and Jerry's. But are there some? So look for the models that sort of that you can look up to, and you think, I kind of want to be like them, until you hit up, and then you say, no, that's not us. So I think it's data collection, systems, know who we are, and then the other thing that's really important is to let people know. As I mentioned earlier, we're never going to be able to tackle the whole plastic industry, and we're not going to be able to, probably influence, a box company that is printing our boxes, but we can let them know that these are the sustainable things that we're doing, and we're looking for people that use ink that is, compostable. So, but we're not going to change them. We're just way too small. That's just how, that's just reality. But we can influence people by telling them. So I think that's why the sort of ESG annual reports are really important, and to get them out to people so that it's sort of a soft sell to others. It's like, we don't have to beat people over the head with, you got to be doing this, you got to be doing this. We can just say, look what we're doing. And look at the difference it's making.
It's a complete dialogue, I think, on just market drivers, right? You may not be able to demand that your supplier use the right ink or the right material or do it in a certain way, but by asking the question or stating your preference, you're indicating to them, this is our market preference, and and if they're receiving that market preference from a bunch of their other customers, they all may be small individually, but collectively that signals to them a trend of like, oh, we're starting to get a lot of questions about materials, in our ink, in our cardboard, in our, whatever it is. And that is a clear indicator to them of like, oh, I better wake up, and we frankly work, that's very much the role that we often play with helping, folks in our platform is they're being asked by, their largest customers or important, meaningful customers, I need to be talking about sustainability. And, they're asking me these metrics, and like, I know I need to develop a real program here in order to stay competitive. And it just, to me, is such a demonstration of what, again, ESG really is about: future-proofing your business and being resilient to the future, but really current conditions of these environmental and also social criteria, and like what you're doing about it, because these are real market forces. These are real market demands of how large companies expect their supply chain, the federal government expects their supply chain to operate and to be thoughtful about these things.
I totally agree with that. I think, and the dialogue with any supplier about sustainability or any sort of projects is super helpful, and it plants the seed. And I think you'd be surprised at how, at what people are actually doing, or, maybe they're working on something. And it's been really, for us, it's been really, really cool to see what our existing suppliers are doing, and just having those dialogues, planting those seeds. You come back a year later and, they come up with something really cool.
Yeah.
So 100%.
Okay, guys, we have just about 10 minutes left, and I promised that we would leave time for questions, and we do have a couple. Before I get to them, is there any burning notion that anyone wants to share, just to kind of wrap it up? If not, I have some really good questions from our listeners today.
I say go with the questions.
All right. Okay. I'm going to start with this first one, which I think is a great one. So can you talk about any process for materiality assessments and how you went ahead with creating strategies around the material topics that came from that? Does anyone want to talk about that? I'm happy to give an overview, or just, I think materiality assessment is another one of those terms in jargon of like, what are we talking about? But all we're saying is it's the end result of that stakeholder engagement. It's once you talk to your employees, you talk to your customers, you talk to your investors, you do market research, and you understand like, okay, this is what is important, our internal and external stakeholders, about our business. These are the issues that are most important to them. It may be emissions and climate. It may be biodiversity. It may be social capital or working rights or fair labor. There's a whole spectrum of what the actual topics might be. There are different standards that help provide guidance. SASB, for instance, which is a financial accounting standard for sustainability, has 77 industry-specific standards that will actually say, this is what is likely financially material to your business, and that you as a company should talk about or should work on and should really underpin the foundation of your ESG and sustainability programs. There's the question of materiality and single materiality or double materiality, right? Like how much those criteria impact a business versus the business's impact on the environment or, the social criteria. So I think, I think materiality assessments also often happen informally. So, I think the question is, what does that, what has that engagement process looked like across talking to those stakeholders, and how did they identify like what that exercise? I think Alix, it was you that was saying you got a small group together, and John, you as well said how you just like got together and thought about like, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what's important to us. Who was involved in that conversation, and where did you kind of land on, identifying those material or important topics?
Well, I think again, that's a really, I really don't really clearly understand the materiality aspect, but I think that from what I do understand is that, we're still really much in the process of discovering, who we are, so that we can engage with people about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the discussions that we are having are with certainly the principal, the founders, and some of the people who've been there the longest. And finding out from other industries, what are you doing for cardboard or ink and glass? So just
so it sounds like to you,
we haven't landed anywhere yet,
but it sounds like for you, material topics are materials and resources, right? Like those are the things. I mean, that's like the very exercise of pulling that together and like, okay, this is, nobody's asking us about I don't know, I'll just use an example, but like no one's asking us about, wastewater outputs, or, no one's, identifying that as like a really critical thing that, we should be paying attention to, because different businesses have different impacts, and those issues also have different impacts on the business.
I think the other thing, and maybe this, I don't know if this has to do with materiality, but it does certainly have to do with a lot of the ESG aspect, and that we're really, actively looking for partners in the community that we can work with that makes sense for us, and so we're, we have some product we can give away. We've got some workforce that we can use. We've got some, certainly some of our the funds that we can set aside for helping people. So I think that that's a big thing for us right now. It's like, who do we connect with that makes sense? So, I mean, we're testing out the next month. One of our products, one of our flavors is we're giving 5% to a domestic violence organization here to help with raise the awareness and care for people that are in that situation. So I think that that's part of our discussion, is like who we are and how do we impact the environment. We believe that a healthy community makes a healthy business can only be healthy with a healthy community, right?
Yep. Yep. I mean, I fall victim all the time to defaulting to environmental sustainability as sustainability. That's my own professional background, but sustainability is a huge umbrella term that also has to do with human capital and social equity and how your business impacts or engages with community. And that's hugely meaningful as part of, you know, a brand's sustainable engagement and program and story. Okay, there is one question in here that is directed to me, but I certainly think you guys are the experts to answer it. So I'm redirecting. Okay, so this was about our conversation on regulation. This question says, well, I love the idea of implementing laws for sustainability. I worry these regulations may cause more small businesses to close due to lack of affordability. Can you speak to this? So you guys are the expert small businesses. How do you navigate these challenges, or how do you balance what may be an additional cost expenditure for, when you think of regulation, you typically think of additional cost to do a thing that you maybe weren't doing before. Is that even the right mindset? Should we break that down? What do you have to say about this?
I could speak a little to it. Again, we don't have a full-time sustainability person, period, in the building at all. Nobody. It is completely volunteer. And it's passionate individuals. So you break it into smaller pieces, it makes it so much easier to digest and like brings that workload down. It's not just one person who's just worrying about this all day, every day. It's like, okay, as a group, what's the strategy? What's the end goal that you want to hit? And each of you are responsible for different types of those relations, whether that's your people, whether it's community service, whether it's giving, whether it's, materials, whether those materials are physical materials or packing materials. Most people are already looking at a lot of these things in their day-to-day in some aspect. So if you can find the way to just break it down and have the conversations with the head of the department or the passionate driver in the department of, okay, this is what we need to find, they can pull those metrics once a month instead of it being this giant project. And that's where I will give the Sustain.Life pitch of like having a tool to drop those numbers in. So it's just like, okay, it's stored there. I did my thing. I put it on my calendar. It took me 45 minutes on a Friday to load that up. And I listened to a podcast while I did it. So I was really kind of a little break for me. And then it all gets collected at the end of the year. So instead of looking at it as this giant burden, I look at it as an opportunity and as a way to also empower people, right? So that they can see that they're contributing to doing something that is making a good impact instead of feeling like a constant burden on the environment. I don't know about other people, but I don't usually have guilt, but I definitely have climate guilt and social guilt. So, it makes me feel like, okay, I can see that my efforts are moving the needle. And I think that reward to people is worth so much more than, hiring some outside person to just run the numbers and just be like, here's your numbers. Good job. It's a different relationship and it's more holistic.
Yeah, really more ingrained and entrenched and like woven into the fabric of how everyone across your team and the company like approaches their job mentally, like their mental model of what their goals and responsibilities and like, it needs to be.
Yeah, on that, I feel like that's why there needs to be a shift in the way we think about these things. And I don't know about this, this person's business type, but for for products. And if you can, I think it's important to start in the design phase. And when you create new products, be proactive, know about which regulations will affect your product, whether it's in the materials or, import duties, and, just know the regulations. It's no longer just about your market and who it's for and then the colors and all that stuff. You really need to do your homework on the regulations, because that more and more is going to influence what type of materials you can use and the processes and how you report on it. So this is why this shift needs to happen early on. And, when we start hiring people and create new projects, we have to add that in the process from the beginning. And that hopefully can save you time and money in trying to fix the headaches afterwards.
Awesome. Okay, guys, we're right at the top of the hour. I want to respect everyone's time. I want to thank each of our panelists, John, Megan, Alix. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your perspective. Thank you to all those who tuned in today and joined us. We will likely send a recording of this webinar, as we usually do. Wishing everyone a happy climate week, and we will see you next time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.